good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining the second in our series of two webinars hosted by SEMLEP and Grant Thornton. And today's is a very topical one, which is trading with Europe business to consumer. So this is really important for anybody that is selling any goods outside the UK, really. I'm going to introduce you to Tom Rathbone, who is the political and public lead for Grant Thornton, and he will introduce the rest of his team. And we look forward to getting a greater understanding, especially on the VAT elements that have flummoxed so many businesses since the trade agreement came in on the 1st of January, as to how we can not only trade with Europe, but look at many opportunities that may present itself now to trade with Europe. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Ruth, and good morning, everyone. Just to introduce sort of my colleagues who will be doing the main bulk of the speaking today. So we've got Alex Balfe, who heads up our international indirect tax team, who'll be talking through some of the details around VAT and what's changed with the new agreement. We've got Adam Taylor, who heads up our customs work, and we'll quickly touch on some of the things that we talked about on Tuesday's seminar. And finally, we've got Kevin Wilson, who works in our operational advisory team and will help package up the things that Alex and Adam says and what they mean for you and your business. So what we're going to do is, as Ruth said today, is just really quick overview of the new sort of rules and what they mean, and then sort of dig down into some of the detail. And the focus of today's session will be really around sort of the VAT consideration. So as we said, selling direct to consumer in Europe, what do you need to understand? What's changed? What are the new requirements? And also picking up on some changes that are going to come again in another 3 months' time. Then we'll just wrap up some of the customs considerations. They're a little bit less this time than they were on Tuesday. And then, as we said, sort of wrap that up in terms of what it means for you and your business. Today could be quite technical in places, but the experts are here and we have built in time for a Q&A. So, if you do have any questions throughout, do feel free to put them in the chat and we'll pick them up at the end, or alternatively, unmute when we get to the Q&A section and fire away. Our team work on this all day, every day. So no question too big, no question too small. Do please ask away. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Kevin, who'll just give us a quick run through of the new agreement and what it means for you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA, it's a trade agreement, not frictionless trade. And it's a zero tariff agreement between the EU and the UK, but it's for those goods that qualify. First things first, just to recognise the magnitude of this. This is going to be, with the UK and the EU, a more detached relationship than the agreement that the EU has with Norway or Turkey. So there we were in 2020. We were part of the European Union. This is on the left-hand part of this slide. And when selling goods to consumers, the big change, before goods were produced, landed in the UK from the rest of the Europe, we were in the EU, so selling to the EU, no great issue there. It was very much a free movement of goods. Now, if you land goods in the UK, let's say from China, and this is on the right-hand side of the diagram, you pay the UK tariff and then you're exporting to the EU. There is the EU tariff. There are VAT issues, certifications, compliance, safety and security, etc. And if you produce goods within the UK, you need to demonstrate that sufficient work has been done to those goods to make them UK goods. Otherwise, they won't qualify for this free tariff status. So just moving one slide on. What we really need to understand here, and these are Incoterms, from Ex Works all the way through to DDP. When we're talking about business to consumer, it's highly unlikely that we'll be doing this Ex Works. we do have a webinar for business to business, which is available on the SEMLEP website. It's also, I think, been posted up there in the chat. So let's focus on the right-hand side of this table, because these are the terms that you would normally be dealing with business to consumer. And what we found is it's usually DAP or DDP. So that's delivery at place or delivery duty paid. Let's just focus on that red box down the bottom in the column of DDP. It's the seller's responsibility in DDP for import duty, taxes, customs clearance. Under DAP, it's the buyer's responsibility. And when selling business to consumer, what does this mean? Are your consumers familiar with and able to deal with import documentation? We need to determine who is acting as that importer. And Alex is going to take you through this from a VAT perspective.
Thanks, Kev. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm a VAT director with Grant Thornton. So I'm now going to look at the main VAT considerations on selling goods B2C to consumers within the EU post-Brexit. So what has changed? Well, from the 1st of January 2021, now the UK has formally left the EU single market, the single VAT system and the customs union. There is now a customs border. So any goods leaving the UK destined for an EU destination will now be qualify as an export. So there'll be zero rated UK VAT. So there's now no option to just charge UK VAT on a sale when you were below the historic distance selling threshold. And the distance selling thresholds were either 35,000 euros or 100,000 euros, depending on which EU member state. And pre-Brexit, you would charge UK VAT on all sales to private consumers in the EU until you breach that threshold or until you opted to voluntarily register in that country. So that meant that a lot of businesses only had to register in certain countries. They could limit their compliance exposure, and from a systems perspective, they had a fallback position where they could charge UK VAT. Unfortunately, from the 1st of January, the UK is no longer within this distance selling regime. So where goods are fulfilled from the UK, you cannot benefit from these thresholds unless you, as the UK supplier, are physically clearing those goods into the EU in your name as the importer and then making a local sale from the EU. Next slide, please. So if you can't rely on the distance selling thresholds, and we know there's a customs border now, what are the main requirements and what are the options available? Well, put simply, and as Kev said, someone will need to physically clear customs. The customs declaration, is more streamlined. Most of these low-value goods will be traveling, through the postal system, via couriers or other freight companies. Often as individual packets, postal packets, rather than huge, large consolidated consignments. But a customs declaration is still required, and someone will need to be named as the consignee, the importer. And they're the ones who will be responsible for paying any import VAT at the border and customs duty if due. My colleague Adam is going to talk about customs duty in more detail. But put simply, there is a threshold on individual consignments of under 150 euros, and there'd be no customs duty due. But over that amount, customs duty will depend on the origin of the goods and ultimately the classification and valuation. So where you as a UK seller decide to be the importer and consignee, you would incur import VAT at the border, you would recover that, and then you would physically charge local VAT on the sale to the consumer. And that's because the acting as the importer means you are deemed to be making a local supply in that EU member state where the goods are imported. If the goods cross a border from that member state to another EU member state, you're then within the distance selling regime. So you can then rely on the various thresholds and you could charge VAT based on where the goods are fulfilled from. But wherever you are importing the goods, so where the country typically where the goods first touch, where the customs entry is made, often known as the country of ingress, there is a zero threshold for VAT registration. Any of the local thresholds that you may see online really only apply to locally incorporated companies established in that country and not to a UK seller. So if you are deciding to act as the importer into a country in the EU, as a basic rule, you will be required to register in that country. You will be required to obtain an EU ERE number. You could flip the responsibility to your customer. So again, put simply, where your customer, the private consumer, is named as the importer, the consignee, they are ultimately responsible for paying that import VAT. And your sale is actually outside the scope of of EU VAT. It's a zero-rated UK sale, and you would not have any obligations for reporting and remittance of tax within the EU. Next slide, please. So this diagram is just to show the implications post-Brexit. So we now have a customs border. Prior to the 1st of January, goods could move freely. There was no customs declaration. Goods could cross a border without a declaration, without any import VAT being due. And based on the distance selling rules, you would charge VAT, either UK VAT, where you were below the threshold, or destination VAT, where you breach the distance selling threshold in the customer's country. And that VAT, because it's what we call supply VAT, local VAT, you could charge that at the point of sale. You would be required to issue a valid VAT invoice, clearly show that VAT amount you charged, and that would have been declared, reported and remitted to the local tax authority in that country. Because the UK was an EU member state, there was no requirement in any EU member state to appoint a fiscal representative to maintain that VAT registration. But unfortunately now, certain countries will enforce a fiscal rep to be appointed. And there would be no import VAT historically. As I said, the goods would move freely, but this is the big change. We now have a customs border, so you need to make the decision, who is the importer and who is going to pay that import VAT. So if you look at the bottom side of the slide, if the UK supplier is acting as the importer, you will require an EU ERE number. So this is a different ERE number to your UK issued ERE from HMRC. You would need a VAT registration in the country you're physically importing those goods in. And then the sale of those goods locally, so in this example, France, would be subject to French reporting requirements, charging VAT on the invoice, remitting that on the invoice, on the VAT return, in the local currency to that tax authority. Next slide, please. So I suppose a lot of people are thinking, Well, based on what Kevin and Alex said, why don't we just say the customer is responsible, name them as the importer? That seems to be the strategy most businesses are doing for B2B. But in reality, there are a lot of commercial considerations. We've all received goods from outside of the UK, outside of the EU. We have seen demands for VAT and customs duty, clearance charges from Royal Mail, maybe from a courier company. So really, I would say it's not just about Incoterms, but really it's the commercial considerations. What are the broader commercial drivers that you should consider? And then the VAT will flow from that. For me, customer experience is top of that. Your customers are key. B2C sales can be fairly anonymous, sometimes one-off. A lot of the sales are lower price points, potentially lower margin. And therefore, if the customer experience isn't great, you could lose that customer going forward. But also, if you have to refund, you have to deal with returns, that margin can be completely wiped out. And therefore, the customer is king. So you should be looking at avoiding the risk of these goods being stopped at the border. I would also suggest stop the risk of a customer receiving a request for payments. Some of my clients have had a double whammy. They've been continuing to charge local VAT at the point of sale. But then, because the customer has been named as the importer, they've had to pay import VAT at the border too. So in effect, the customer has paid VAT twice. And it's not a great experience. Customers complain. Returns is also an issue. If you offer a returns service, which most businesses do under various European consumer rights legislation, if the customer is named as the importer, any import VAT that was paid when the goods came into the country is then lost when the goods are returned. So that shortfall may be made up by you, the supplier. You may wish to put the customer in the right position, but otherwise that import VAT is lost. And because it's import VAT and not VAT charged on the invoice, it can't just be reversed through a VAT return. You should also consider the duty saving. As I said before, individual consignments, parcels under 150 euros, so what's that, about 135 pounds, they are free of customs duty. So it's sometimes a bit of a modelling exercise here, looking at different markets in the EU and looking at where is the greater saving. The duty saving, based on the customer being able to import without duty, or you as a UK company bringing the goods in en masse, a single clearance, and then making a local sale and paying customs duty, which is an absolute cost, against any import VAT lost on returns. Very aware that some countries in the EU have a very high rate of return. In some sectors, particularly clothing, footwear, I've heard stories of Germany having a return rate of in excess of 60%, in some instances a lot higher. So really, it may be that you mix and match your strategy, based on the individual market and country. Next slide, please. So I said there were two models: your customer as the consignee, a kind of non-DDP model, or you as the UK supplier acting as the consignee and importer, where you are delivering duty paid. But in reality, there are other options. So there is a hybrid option that you could apply between now and the 1st of July. This is where the customer is the consignee, so they are named as the importer, they're named on the customs declaration, but actually you arrange to prepay that import VAT on their behalf. So the goods are physically cleared without any request for payments. The customer receives the goods without any further request for any further payments. And your supply is still outside the scope of EU VAT because you're not the importer. And then I'm going to touch upon a bit later a big change that's coming in across the EU with effect the 1st of July. This is the extension of the one-stop shop, or the OSS. And this is going to bring in new rules around selling into the EU or selling from the EU to private consumers. Next slide, please. So just looking at this hybrid model in a bit more detail, well, strictly speaking, the customer is the importer of record, the consignee. The goods are delivered import VAT prepaid. And this is a service that we're seeing offered by a lot of third-party freight agents, parcel courier companies. Sometimes they actually refer to this as a DDP delivery. That is sometimes a bit confusing because when we talk about DDP, we're talking about the supplier delivering duty paid, acting as the importer, making a local sale. But when a freight agent is talking about DDP for B2C low value items, they're often talking about this model. It's a model where they will physically pay the import VAT and any customs duty if those goods are over 150 euros to the customs authority when the declaration is made. It's made in the name of the consumer, and hopefully there's a good customer experience here. So this is the confusing part. VAT can't be physically charged at the point of sale because you're not actually VAT registered as a result of this model. You are not physically charging VAT. You're merely collecting an amount from the customer equal to import charges, import VAT, customs duty if applicable, and you're passing that over in a transparent manner to the freight agent on behalf of your end customer. So this can't be itemized on the invoice just as VAT as you do now. And as I said before about returns, you can't then just credit this out through a VAT return because this is no longer reported in an EU VAT return. It's physically paid at the border by your freight agent on behalf of your customer. Next slide, please. So, as I said, it is more akin to a disbursement. So you need to consider, if you are going to use this model, how you're going to refer to this VAT amount. You probably want something in your terms and conditions, but you also want to find a suitable line item on your invoice. Maybe talk about import taxes, duties, and clearance charges, rather than showing VAT at a specific rate. And then you also need to make sure that this amount is passed to the freight agent. They will likely bill you for the amount they've paid to customs. So really, you need really good communication channels with your freight agents, with your courier company. There needs to be complete clarity on who they're making the declaration in the name of, the value. We're already hearing some horror stories about different well-known freight agents who are getting the valuation wrong. Maybe they're using a grossed up amount, including VAT, for the customs declaration, and then VAT is being levied on top. We've also heard of some well-known courier companies who can't deal with zero or reduced rate supplies. They're always declaring supplies at the standard rate, and therefore, in some instances, VAT is being overpaid. And if that's the case, it's very difficult to get that VAT back because, as I said before, this import VAT is proper to the consumer, to your customer, and not to you. Next slide, please. So, big changes coming up. these changes were actually originally slated to come in on Brexit Day, on the 1st of January 2021. But due to COVID, probably due to Brexit as well, and due to some technology issues, member states were saying they didn't have enough time to put in the right technology for this. This has now been delayed to 6 months, but we've been promised by the European Commission it will be in place from the 1st of July 2021. So what's happening? Well, an optional scheme is being introduced to cover the distance selling of goods to consumers in EU member states with a value less than 150 euros. So there are two versions of the scheme. One relating to imports, goods coming from outside the EU, so from the UK, and then that's called the IOSS, the Import One-Stop Shop, and then just the plain vanilla OSS, which is for normal distance sales of goods between EU member states. Next slide, please. So under this one-stop shop, how will it work? Well, in a way, it's trying to formalize this hybrid model that a lot of businesses are using post-Brexit. It will allow a UK business to register in a member state of its choice. I would suggest Ireland may be a very popular choice due to the language, due to the pragmatic tax authority, and also due to the proximity and good relationship with HMRC and the UK. You would have a single VAT registration via that member state. You would declare VAT wherever you have a customer in the EU through this single registration, through a single return, and you would make a single payment. This is the natural extension of the current MOS for digital services and telecom services. So MOS stands for Mini One-Stop Shop. It was the kind of prototype for this one-stop shop, and that's been in place since 2015. So if you already supply digital content, anything that's downloadable, accessed remotely, electronically, digitally downloaded, you may already have a MOS registration, so you'll be familiar with the return. It's one big return, all the EU member states listed. You'd put in the value of total sales in the period against each country, the relevant rate, and then declare the VAT and pay it over. So that VAT is the point of sale, based on the customer location. Those goods will then benefit from no import VAT when the goods go through customs. So VAT will no longer be physically collected on these items. They'll go through a green channel akin to a new regime that has recently been implemented in Norway and from the 1st of January also here in the UK. In addition, the EU is getting rid of the 22 euro low value import VAT relief. So all imports of goods 150 euros and below will now be subject to import VAT. But if you register for this IOSS, the import I do apologise. If you register for the OISS, the import one-stop shop, you will not pay any import VAT. It will all be charged at the point of sale. There is a fallback. So the Commission has said that where you opt not to use the one-stop shop, a second simplification will be available where your postal operator, courier firm, or the customs agent that you engage will be able to physically pay that VAT direct to the customs authority via a monthly payment. So there is a fallback position, but again, based on all the considerations we looked at before, I would suggest that you would want the ability to charge VAT at the point of sale, because if you refund that VAT to the customer, if there's a return, you can control that VAT via your invoice, via your VAT return, the MOS, and and physically refund that to the customer. Next slide, please. So in summary, under OS from the 1st of July 2021, so only a couple of months now, VAT can be charged at the point of sale. It will be based on your customer's country. There won't be any thresholds, either for VAT upon import or VAT in the customer's country. You would file a single quarterly VAT return. And there will be a lot of detail on this, a lot of complexities. We're still digesting a lot of the implementing regulations, the guidance that's being issued almost on a weekly basis now by the European Commission. And Grant Thornton will be working with our member firm teams across Europe to understand how this will be implemented locally. So if you do need information on this, do let us know. Next slide, please. So that was the VAT side. I'm now going to pass over to Adam Taylor, my colleague, to quickly look at the customs considerations of B2C. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everyone. I'm Adam. I head GT's UK customs team, and I've spent 3 or 4 years mainly living and breathing Brexit most days. Just to pick up where Alex left off, really, I think the key is to emphasise the significant difference moving forward between the treatment of B2B movements to the EU and from the EU, and the treatment of B2C movements. In particular, as Alex emphasised, the introduction of the one-stop shop, particularly for low-value goods, is going to have a significant impact on the way imports are dealt with. That said, that there are still key customs compliance considerations, and these are what we term the 4 pillars of customs compliance, and they will still be relevant even under the B2C arrangements. The first pillar we always consider is the classification, and this is the commodity code given to a product, and these can be found in the UK customs tariff on HMRC's website, and that'll give you a list of all the various products, and there's a good search function on there which will help you identify the relevant commodity code. And at this time, the commodity codes between the UK and the EU remain the same, although we would anticipate some divergence eventually to come through on that. Valuation, I mean, that was my big takeaway from Alex's session, was the key impact that valuation has on the treatment of the B2C supplies he outlined, and in particular that €150 limit for the use of the one-stop shop, where values exceed €150, then you're very much back to the standard customs valuation rules, and those mainly are based on a sales value, although there are circumstances where a sales value may not be appropriate, such as connected party valuations or supplies to branches, which are obviously less relevant in B2C than B2B type transactions. The other interesting upshot of the one-stop shop relates to origin. Now, for B2B supplies, origin has become absolutely fundamental under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Goods need to originate in one of the signatory parties to qualify for tariff and quota-free access to the other party in the agreement. For supplies under €150, where they are considered of negligible value, then the non-payment of duty in those scenarios is less concerned with origin, because it applies to imports from all territories. So the zero duty is not claimed under the basis of an origin under the B2C 150 euro value. It's claimed under the basis of the use of the one-stop shop relief. And procedure also is the fourth pillar of customs compliance, in that whether exporting or importing, part of the declaration procedure is to confirm to the exporting and importing tax authorities through the use of a customs procedure code the intended use of the goods, whether they're being brought in for sale or for processing. And that becomes somewhat less relevant for B2C, because in almost all circumstances under B2C, goods will be being brought into what we term free circulation, i.e. for sale. They're not for processing and re-export. They are there because you're identified a customer, hence B2C. Next slide, please. So we've drafted a small table just to summarize some of these considerations for the B2C changes. And as Alex outlined, some of these B2C changes are currently active in a pre-1 July scenario into the EU. And some of these will change from the 1st of July when the one-stop shop goes active. Now, to explain some of the differences, for the import one-stop shop, yes, it can be used for consignments under 150 euros in value, and it's unavailable for consignments over 150 euros in value. The other big takeaway really, and having looked at the European Commission customs guidance on the implementation of the import one-stop shop, is about customs declaration data sets. And under that import one-stop shop, your customs representative in the country of receipt will be able to submit, in effect, a simplified import customs declaration. Simplified in the sense that the data elements required within that customs declaration are much reduced, which should allow quicker and easier clearance, and we would hope to some extent cheaper clearance as well. For consignments over 150 euros, we are expecting to see full declarations being required for those imports, subject to any simplifications that already exist in those particular territories. For example, the UK currently operates a system called CFSP, Customs Freight Simplified Procedures, which some of you may be aware of. And there are alternative and similar systems in other EU member states that can be used and will continue to be available for consignments over 150 euros. The third thing that's worth highlighting in terms of the changes for B2C shipments and the relevance of the trade and cooperation agreement, as the 150 euros applies to goods from outside the EU and not just from the UK, and it's a value basis that determines the zero duty, i.e. the goods are of negligible value, then the origin as determined under the trade and cooperation agreement is less relevant for claiming that zero tariff at import. But for goods over 150 euros moving from the UK to the EU, then we're back to some of the issues that we talked about in the B2B session earlier this week, in that for goods to move into the EU tariff-free from the UK under the trade and cooperation agreement, then origin will need to be evidenced, and that's usually through an invoice declaration or a long-term supplier declaration, and that can only be made if the goods have undergone some or sufficient degree of processing whilst in the UK. For example, if you are in effect acting as a distributor from the UK for goods that you are buying in the US, let's say t-shirts made in the US, and you are then supplying those to the EU without undertaking significant processing to them, then those goods are not going to qualify under the TCA, and if their value is over 150 euros, then tariffs would be due. If your consignment is over 150 euros, but you do enough processing as outlined in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, then your goods may still qualify for zero tariff entry into the EU. And if that's the case, then we need to work through the slides that Alex talked through earlier to determine the exact way to treat those imports, the kind of declarations required, and any other considerations when making those kind of sales, including local VAT registrations or not, etc. Next slide, please. I think, fine. So just to summarize, if the value is under 150 euros, there's no duty and the origin is not relevant for duty purposes, particularly under the TCA. And if the value is over 150 euros, we would expect to see normal customs declarations, and that's where Incoterms will become more relevant, and the issues highlighted by Kevin at the start of the session come back into play. And the origin under the TCA makes a difference to try to minimize the risk of duty being payable at import into the EU. Final comment on this section from me is related to that making of declarations into the EU. And what we would advise and suggest is that your freight forwarder is the best point of contact for actually talking through that limited data set, what's referred to as the H7 data set within the European Commission guidance on the import of the goods into the EU under that import one-stop shop. And I think that's me done, and back to Kevin to provide a summary of the issues we've talked through so far.
Okay, so from what we've heard, what we really need to do, so from Alex, we need to understand those VAT requirements, and from Adam, consider the customs and compliance. We have to think about who is going to be the importer. But it's important to understand the financial impact of this. Think of the scenarios that we're talking about here, under and over 150 euro value. How do you want to approach those commercial decisions, the customer experience, impact the cost of returns? What this does is potentially alter your margin profit analysis of doing business in these channels. So there's a question there and a decision. Does the model still work? And the decision is, does this change the way you operate? And is there anything that you can do to mitigate potential costs? You know, I'm thinking of, if it's over 150 euro value, then that flips back into the business to business webinar with mitigation strategies. Okay, and now moving on, if we have any questions, please. Tom, do you have any questions?
So I appreciate there was a lot in there, wasn't there?
In there.
Is that Ruth? Ruth, are you back?
I am back. But yeah, no, I mean, thank you. I don't know, I haven't got any questions. I think that was so clear and gives so much food for thought. But I don't know whether anybody else on the call has any questions.
I think what I'll do is I'll just put
there's one.
The slide that I think is probably the most useful, see if other people agree, but is this one, in terms of just visualizing sort of the changes that.
Tanya, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, please do so.
Hi everyone. Thanks for taking my question, and I'm really sorry if it comes across like I haven't quite grasped this, but maybe it's because I haven't. So I really apologize in advance, but I've been so confused. And anyway, thank you for hearing me out. To explain briefly, so obviously I'm selling B2C, and generally speaking, I sell items at £5 and at £30. So I'm well below the 150 mark. am I thinking about this correctly, that between now and July, my customers, I'm not charging VAT for EU customers, but they will be getting a bill for customs duty, but not VAT? Is that what they're receiving on their end if my package gets stopped in the post?
Hi, Tanya. It's Alex here. Let me answer this one. So there'll be no customs duty because the goods are under 150 euros.
Okay.
There will be VAT due at the border, import VAT. So as long as your customer is the consignee, they will be responsible for paying that import VAT. It's likely the goods valued at £5 may not have import VAT levied, because there is, until the 1st of July, a threshold of 22 euros for import VAT. That's disappearing come the 1st of July. So it's likely for your larger value items of £30, your customer will have to pay import VAT, and they'll be getting a demand for that.
Right, because I've been shipping my orders as normal, and I've only had 2 people raise so far, and they were both yesterday actually, raised that they got a bill, and they were the shipments were around kind of 20-25 quid value. Yep. that got flagged. So okay, so right now the customer, if the shipment, sorry, and my shipments go out in large letter, which I understand are sometimes getting through a little bit more often without the customer being billed. But so if it's flagged at the border, my customer's getting a bill for the VAT. Is it VAT only, or is it VAT plus some sort of handling charge? Because I think that's what makes people really angry, is the handling charge.
Yeah, no, it is. It's generally a handling charge. It will be a charge levied by, for example, a local post office, or customs authority, or freight agent, and that's the handling fee they charge. That's normally a one-off fee, and it can be more than the VAT at stake. Yeah,
that's the real anger point. Okay, but just so I have understood that correctly, so after July, if I want to continue selling to customers in the EU, I will need to sign up for the one-stop shop, and I can't do that right now. I can't sign. There's nothing to sign up for right now. That's something I do in July.
Yeah, it will be nearer the time. I believe most tax authorities are getting the registration process set up now. So I'd imagine, hopefully, as in the next 5-6 weeks, you'll be able to register. We're keeping in touch with our colleagues in Ireland to find out when that can happen. It may also be a requirement to appoint a local representative, because you are a non-EU company. We're still working through that, because the legislation talks about that not being a requirement where there is a kind of cooperation agreement between the two countries. So we're hoping that all the agreements that have been signed as part of the Brexit agreement are enough to mean you don't need a representative. But worst case, you may need to appoint a local agent in Ireland or another EU member state to kind of step in your shoes with that registration.
And the local rep would just be in that one country, that Ireland, for example, or it would be in any country I'm selling to. Okay, in one country.
It's likely to be one country, and in the country where you register.
Okay, and so let's assume that all happens and I sign up for it and whatever. So at that point, I charge. Let's say it's a German customer, so I would charge German VAT at
Correct.
That specific rate. So I need to then understand what the VAT rates are in all the different countries, so I can charge Correct. My German customer German VAT on the sale, and now they're not going to get any sort of bill when it comes through.
That's the plan. the way this has been planned is that import VAT will no longer be levied on goods coming into the EU with a value of 150 or below. So they'll go in, a kind of virtual green customs channel, no customs duty, no import VAT. They're subject to VAT, but that's all charged by you at the point of sale and remitted through the IOSS.
And through the IOSS process, there will be a long list of here's how much is sold in France, here's how much is sold in Germany, and all those different rates. And I'll either have to be smart enough to charge, or no, I will have to be smart enough to work out those rates. I can't just raise my prices and know that I've cut, like do it as an admin exercise in the background, because I will have to provide VAT receipts if customers ask for them.
Yeah, I mean that's the issue. It's the VAT receipt. So you could, if you wanted, keep the same price commercially, one single price point, but then your margin gets reduced for the high rates. But yeah, there will be there's likely a requirement to issue a VAT invoice and show the VAT amount. Again, that's going to be in the detail that we're studying at the moment on the implementing regs, because under the MOS, the mini one-stop shop, they recently made a simplification to say you only need to follow the rules where you register. So in Ireland, and Ireland normally has quite a pragmatic view on tax invoices B2C. But my gut feeling is you will have to show the VAT rate. What we're not 100% sure at the moment is around currency, whether you'll be able to just show the VAT in euros, or whether, for example, Polish zloty may have to be, shown on the invoice.
Right, even though they've done the transaction in pounds, you still might have to...
So one of the kind of key rules on VAT is the amount you charge is the amount you remit, and an invoice requirement wherever you show VAT, it normally has to be shown in the reporting currency. So the currency where you're going to report that on a VAT return. It's likely if you have to issue an invoice, you may have to do a currency conversion for that VAT amount.
Okay, so right now where I've had these customers complain yesterday, it's because it was a slightly higher value order. It probably slid right over the 22, and so it got stopped. So I'm in kind of, as long as I sell more of the cheaper items, I'll probably be okay and my orders will get through until July, and it will kind of see me through to the one-stop shop.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. By the way, I'm trying to let it all kind of sift through.
The video will be available, Tanya, so you can listen to it again and again and again and again as many times as you like. It'll probably be up on the website from tomorrow. But yes,
and Tanya, I was going to say everyone's getting to grips with this for the first time. I
know I haven't. Yeah, I haven't talked to a single person who understands it yet, and it's crazy. But where we're selling through marketplaces like Amazon, eBay, etc., they're obviously showing kind of like a receipt or invoice details. So they are going to have to take a much more active role in this whole currency issue that you've outlined.
Yeah, and also, I mean, we didn't go into this in the presentation. There are special rules applying to marketplaces. So for a lot of transactions, the marketplace is going to be deemed to be the seller and responsible for remitting VAT. So that's something to get complete clarity on. And imagine Amazon and other marketplaces will be sending you comms on this in terms of your responsibilities, the liability of your invoices to them, and when they'll be handling the VAT.
Okay. Sorry, I do have two other quick questions. Right now on these low value goods, do my goods when I ship them out need a commercial invoice, or is the is it CN22 or whatever that I print off from Royal Mail, is that acceptable?
I will defer on the customs point to Adam. From my understanding, the valuation is shown on that CN22. That is the customs declaration. I'm wondering whether under non-tax customs rules you need to show, send an invoice along with the goods, just under normal consumer laws.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so Tanya, I would agree exactly with what Alex has said. I think on the CN22 you state the customs value, and that's fine for customs declaration purposes. But I'm certain from a commercial and legal technical perspective that your customer would want, even within the package, the invoice to be included to see exactly what the details were. That's where they would, if there was a problem with the product, they would contact you, etc. So. Value on the CN22 invoice within the package is fine as far as I'm concerned. Okay,
great. Just as a kind of point of reference, I never get asked for VAT invoices. So, and the admin in it would kill me on a £5 sale, because that £5 includes the postage charge. And so I am happy to supply a kind of VAT invoice or VAT receipt for anybody who asks. But in general, they're not going out on low value goods. Do you have a view on that, whether that's okay? I mean, I know I'm required to do it if somebody asks, but I'm not doing it proactively because of the huge admin burden of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. So pre-Brexit, strictly speaking, you had a requirement to issue a tax invoice. The distance selling rules say, whenever you sell to a private consumer, under distance selling, you must issue an invoice. However, post-Brexit, as long as your customer is the importer, you're no longer within the EU invoicing rules. So you're then within the UK invoicing rules. And the UK would say, even though this is a B2C transaction, you wouldn't be required to issue a formal tax invoice.
Would not be required.
Well, you would still. I would say it's advisable to produce one because it provides an audit trail, and it provides you with the evidence for HMRC why VAT wasn't charged. But you would also need to retain proof of postage, because that's the big risk. Whenever you're not charging UK VAT or you're charging VAT at the zero rate, that's where HMRC can raise an assessment. But HMRC have typically taken the view that there's no requirement to issue an invoice B2C unless the customer asks.
Okay, that's fine. And one final question, and I promise I'll stop. If I go down the DDP route, which Amazon is mandating of its sellers, so right now on this £5 sale, the product part is £2.50 and the postage is £2.50. The cheapest DDP rate I can find is with Royal Mail for approximately 10 quid.
Wow.
So to supply a European customer under DDP, it will now cost, it will go from £5 up to £12.50 if I do that. But if I were to do that, that is essentially me paying all the taxes and fees up front. And it all is that all covered by my UK VAT registration, or do I still have to go into the one-stop shop if I do this?
So it really depends what you mean by DDP. So if we're talking about that hybrid model where you're physically paying the import VAT on behalf of the customer so the goods can clear, that will be replaced by the one-stop shop. But if you're importing in your name and bringing the goods in and then making a local sale to, say, Amazon, that's different, because that's a business-to-business supply.
So the first scenario is where I'm selling to Bob in Germany, and I'm simply paying those fees ahead of time. The second example is where I now want to store goods in Amazon Germany's warehouse, and so that's
fulfilled by
the second
Amazon,
one.
FBA, in Germany, France, or Italy. Yeah. So for FBA, you would need to be the importer yourselves, bring the goods in. You'd pay import VAT at the border, you would recover that. And depending on the country, you would likely have to register for VAT, and then recover your import VAT and charge VAT on your sale.
Right. Okay. Okay, so in summary, on my cheapest sales, if I'm not breaking any laws, those customers are required to pay, although it's a bad customer experience, they are required to pay the duty, and the duty right now. But that situation will change with the one-stop shop in July. It's only a decision in the interim whether I want to do the Royal Mail DDP.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of between now and 1st July for those B2C sales, but for the Amazon ones, you may have less choice there.
Yeah, because they may force me to do the Royal Mail DDP.
Yeah, but I think on that, you need clarity with Royal Mail if that's actually what they mean, because if you're not careful, no one can recover that import VAT.
Okay.
Because it's a business-to-business supply, it should be recoverable, but it will depend who the consignee is.
Okay.
And also, if you're selling inventory, you're probably not sending individual consignments worth £5 to Amazon. You're sending a big box with 200 of them in.
Yes, you're right. Bob would order one. Amazon would have 100. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you need to then consider the customs duty on that, because it's likely the consignment imported will be above the 150 limit. And you therefore need to look at the commodity code that needs to be used. You need to look at the origin, whether they are of UK origin, they qualify under the free trade agreement and therefore nil duty.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate that advice.
No, it was fascinating, Tanya, to listen to it from a real life example. So no, well done. Thank you for asking that question. And I just want to thank Tom and the team from Grant Thornton. So this video will be put on our website, I think, as of tomorrow. So if you do want to download it and listen to it again and again, that would be absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much, and enjoy trading.